going to be meeting with, among others, Secretary Antony Blinken, Secretary Lloyd Austin, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and others as well. All right, Natalie, stay with us. Appreciate you joining us as we're continuing to monitor this situation from all different angles. I want to bring in now CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayeb. He's there in Tel Aviv. Imtiaz, first of all, talk to us about what you're seeing, what you're hearing there now that we understand that that drones have been launched from Iran and are headed over to Israel.
Yeah, hey, Lana, good to be with you. Well, you're absolutely right. We have confirmation from the Israeli military that those drones have been launched. We understand that they are currently in Iraqi airspace, but we also understand that these drones could likely take up to 9 hours to even get anywhere near Israel. 9 hours, that's a very long time. So the question then becomes at what point does Israel, which has one of the most sophisticated aerial defense systems in the world, will intercept those drones? And if these are, well, they are the Iranian drones, but if they are the variety that we've seen Iran use in other arenas, and this notably when it comes to Russia purchases Iranian drones, which are called Shahid drones, and they use them in Ukraine. And Ukraine very successfully shoots those out of the sky. So one would imagine that that is something that Israel will be able to do. Whatever the case, we have, of course, been hearing from the Israeli military who say that they are monitoring the situation. We heard from, as you were saying, from Hagari, who was saying that not only is the aerial defense array system on high alert, but so too is the Israeli Air Force, the Israeli Navy, but more importantly, that they are also working in concert with the U.S. as well. So there's a lot of moving parts here right now. This is, of course, concerning. But again, when we look at the timeline of how long these drones could potentially reach Israeli airspace, if they ever do, the question is what is Iran trying to achieve? And more importantly, is this all they're going to do, or is this the beginning of what they're going to do? And again, what they're going to do because of what? This is in retaliation for that strike in Damascus at the Iranian embassy there, in which 12 people were killed, including a senior military commander from Iran. Since then, Iran has been vowing that it would avenge that attack, and now it's started. But again, we have many, many more questions than answers. But all we can say, or what we do know for sure, is that this has begun.
Imtiaz, as we have heard that so many of the different principal actors in this want to bring down the temperature on the situation. And given that you mentioned that Israeli defense forces are positioned through the Iron Dome there to potentially take down all of these drones before they ever make it to make a strike in Israel, will that be sufficient? Do we have any sense of how much retribution Iran feels like they need in order to, at a minimum, save face following the killing of those military leaders?
Yeah, you bring up a really fascinating point, Lana, which is, that's really what this is about. Iran feeling like it has to respond and it has to show this show of force. And that is what's kind of fueling this. And so, when you talk about there are obviously other actors involved, the U.S. a very key player in this, calling for restraint. We understand that over the past several days that the U.S. has been communicating with Iran through the Swiss embassy inside Tehran. Switzerland has an embassy in Tehran. And so the U.S. sends messages to the Swiss embassy, which then goes to the Iranian leadership, who then communicate again through the Swiss embassy back to the U.S. And we know that there has been a lot of this communication been going on. And what we understand from that communication is that both the Iranians and the U.S. have said that they do not want a major escalation, that they do not want to trigger a wider war across the Middle East, which many people say would be catastrophic. In saying that, as you so rightly point out, Iran feels a lot of pressure to do something. The question is will they do something beyond what we're seeing now, which is the launch of these drones from its airspace, now traveling here to Israel? Again, it's going to take 9 hours for those drones to get here, if they ever do. And, you again raise a very important point. Is that enough for destroying an embassy, which Iranians have said was an attack on their sovereignty? Because, as we know, embassies are effectively sovereign soil for that specific nation, and if there's going to be anything more they're going to do in response to that. But again, because we know that Iran has been saying that it doesn't want to see a wider escalation, and yet its proxies are very active in the region, it's really hard to see just where this goes beyond this point. That said, it is still very alarming. The idea that Iran could potentially target inside Israel. This is one state attacking another state. That would be very serious indeed, and is something that has not happened in a very long time, at least in this context, and so it'd be very, very worrying indeed.
Imtiaz, for our viewers, you are there in Tel Aviv. It's about 10:30, I think, at night there at this point, so late in the evening. It's going to be several hours before those weapons actually make their way to Israel. What are you hearing there, given that especially they may land in early morning?
Yeah, the mood is really interesting. You know, we obviously have been here all day, and you sort of walk around Tel Aviv and things seem pretty normal. People were out and about. People were going to restaurants, at the beach, going out about their day. It's the day off today. It was Shabbat for the daytime hours. So, you know, it was relatively quiet to begin with. But I would say that, you know, things have changed very quickly this evening. We had an announcement from the Israeli government saying that they were basically canceling school tomorrow, that people were not supposed to gather in very large groups. And that sort of started trickling out more and more. And then we heard that Israel's security cabinet was joining. And now, of course, we have the announcement that these drones have been launched from Iran. So it will be interesting to see, just sort of in the next day or so, or in the next hours or so, to see what happens and how people are going to react. But the reality is that people have been told, be prepared, something is potentially happening, and that is why those rulings, if you will, or those requests for people to, again, as we say, don't send your kids to school, don't gather in very large groups, were put out, and it's hoped that people will follow those rules. But we have to understand that for 6 months now, since October 7th, Israel has been on, for lack of a better phrase, war footing. This is a country which is in the grips of a conflict, which is dealing with what many people here say is a national trauma, which they are still living because of the hostages still inside Gaza, and of course the fact that there is still fighting going on in Gaza. And as we know, inside Gaza, the situation there, the humanitarian situation there, is pretty catastrophic as well. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I think the idea that Iran would try to launch some sort of attack on Israel is definitely alarming to people. But again, people we've been speaking to have a lot of faith in, as you say, the Iron Dome. They have a lot of faith in Israel's defense systems. They have a lot of faith in the Israeli military, even though part of that was shaken after October 7th. And there's a lot of criticisms of the Israeli military for not responding more quickly to that. Still, I think, again, because we're at this point seeing drones being launched from Iran, it's going to take many hours for there to get them. I don't get the sense of any sort of national panic or hysteria. But again, it's obviously very concerning for the president. It's very concerning for the Israeli leadership. And that is why at this moment, so many high profile and so many high level interactions are happening at this stage to figure out not only what's happening, but what could potentially happen next.
All right, Imtiaz, we will continue to check in with you. For now, please be safe. I want to bring in now CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis from our Washington bureau. Olivia, we have been on standby for this. We knew that it might be happening. Even President Biden, you're looking at live images right now, has determined that he needed to come back to the White House. This is his helicopter at Joint Base Andrews. The president is on his way to the security room to meet with his national security team and try and assess the situation, as we now know that there are several drones making their way from Iran to Israel and will be making their way there in the next couple of hours. So, Olivia, talk to us about how U.S. and Israeli officials have been preparing for this attack.
Sure, Lana. Well, as you've been discussing, this was a very telegraphed response. We have effectively known since April 1st, that Damascus strike, that this was coming. And that's why you've seen this torrent of public messaging and diplomatic efforts vis-a-vis Iran. The U.S. has been remarkably transparent about what it's been seeing, what it's been hearing, and the kinds of messages that it's been delivering and receiving from Iran in the run-up to this action. The Israelis similarly have been telegraphing their level of preparedness and what preparatory steps they're taking in order to respond when they need to respond. Likewise, you've seen dozens of Western governments pick up the phone and call the foreign minister in Tehran to urge restraint, to urge caution, and to prevent this conflict from escalating regionally. You've seen, by the way, the Iranians take those calls. They feel like they're a player, and they have been effectively telegraphing and calibrating their response. All of this has been designed, of course, in order to shape Iranian behavior. And I think that you are seeing that. It is very early, as we've been saying. We do not know what else is to come. But this does not initially appear to be a worst-case scenario. As we've been discussing, drones have a very long lead time. They are easy to intercept. Israel and the U.S. have excellent air defenses, and they are very much prepared for and anticipating an attack of this sort. We always expected that the Iranians would do something visible, that they would target something with an Israeli government nexus. We do not know yet what the targets are, and I'm not sure that we know that these drones are coming from inside Iran. I am waiting for confirmation on that detail, because as we know, Iran had a spectrum of potential behaviors to reach for here. They could have launched things from inside of Iran. They could have enlisted its proxies. They could be reaching for targets inside Israel. They could be reaching for targets outside of Israel in the region. They could be targeting things that are designed to incur casualties or not. Right now, and again, early stages, it appears to be at the lower end of the escalatory spectrum. We have to see if this is followed or accompanied by ballistic or cruise missiles, which we know from our Pentagon team Iran was also preparing. And I
thought I would say, Olivia, if you will, on that question that you raised, according to the IDF, the drones that were launched came from within Iran's own territory. But as you mentioned, this may not be the end of action. There may be additional action that could come from proxies. We certainly know that Iran has supported many other groups, including Hamas, operating inside of Gaza. But as you're talking about Iran actually heeding some of these messages that are coming from the United States, and given that there are no direct diplomatic ties between the two, what is the potential that something could go wrong, given how highly sensitive all of this is at this very moment?
Absolutely. And Lana, on that point, I would say if it is indeed the case that these drones were launched from inside Iran, that is significant. Iran and Israel, despite all of their animosity over the years, have never, as far as I'm aware, and I spoke with officials about this today, directly exchanged strikes from inside their territory. So that is a significant development if it is in fact confirmed.
Right. And that's from the IDF spokesperson, but CBS has not independently confirmed that additionally.
Understood. But Iran has often reached for its proxies in order to maintain that veneer of deniability, that it wasn't directly involved. If it's decided to drop that veneer, then that, I think, is notable, even if we don't know, again, what else is to come and whether this is the extent of it. I think that U.S. involvement here has been telegraphed. The Iranians know that the U.S. is prepared to respond defensively, and therefore are unlikely to sort of respond to defensive responses. But of course, as you mentioned, there's a lot of room for miscalculation. There's a lot of room for emotions to intervene. There's a lot of room for political calculus. There are, of course, a lot of questions about who has an interest in this war spreading and who doesn't. The U.S. has very clearly made its case that it is in nobody's interest for this to expand into a regional conflagration. I think the Iranians have long made the calculus. I spoke to lots of senior foreign intelligence officials who have handled Iranian portfolios who've said that the supreme leader in Iran is known to be risk-averse. Right now, at a moment where Iran sort of feels confident, feels like things are in the region are going in its favor, that Israel is sort of becoming more of a pariah, or at least more isolated. Why would they sort of alter their risk calculus to be more risk-prone rather than risk-averse? Again, and that's based on, the analysts who have looked at the Supreme Leader's behavior over the years. So it would be an interesting choice. It would be a notable choice if this became meaningfully escalatory. But again, we do not know whether this is the extent of it and what the nature of the response from Israel is going to be.
Very interesting points, Olivia. Especially, we do know that Iran's supreme leader has pledged that retribution. Remind our viewers about the attack in Syria, about the military leaders who were killed in that, and why Iran is taking it so seriously, and why they believe that Israel was responsible, though Israel has not claimed responsibility.
Sure. Israel hasn't claimed responsibility, and the U.S. has, as far as I'm aware, not yet confirmed that it was, in fact, a diplomatic facility that was targeted, although indications are that it was. This was a high-value target, according to the Israelis, a top general within the IRGC, arguably somebody they saw as more effective on the battlefield than, for example, the Quds Force commander. They saw an opportunity and they sought it out. I am told that, generally speaking, the Mossad is tasked with sort of doing a risk calculus before such strikes. You have a window of several hours before you have to go in order to determine what the response might be. And its intelligence services would have said, OK, we think that this is worth taking a shot. The value of removing this person from the battlefield is going to exceed what we expect Iran will do in response. That's based on conversations with intelligence officials who understand how this process works, not based on anything specific about this situation. But you also know that Israel wants Iran to think that nobody who has its interests or who works against its interests is safe anywhere. There are questions about whether the timing of this attack was particularly prudent. The U.S., of course, has said that it had no heads up that it was going to happen. I am not aware whether the Israelis have, in the aftermath, sort of offered justification or their internal risk calculus for taking the strike. But the fact is that it has set in motion these kinds of unpredictable tit-for-tats, and we'll see whether that escalatory ladder goes up or down from this point.
And Olivia, appreciate all of the information and the context that you're giving our viewers in this moment. I will say I was just handed a piece of paper that says that CBS News can confirm through a U.S. official that the drones were launched from within Iranian territory, which, as you point out and help us to understand, is a very big difference in how Iran has previously interacted with Israel. I know you're going to continue working the phones and speaking with your sources, and we will check back in with you. Olivia, thank you. I want to bring in now CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. She is the former acting assistant secretary for counterterrorism. So, Sam, we were talking just yesterday about the heightened alert, that these warnings were coming out. Now it seems that we at least have some measure of how Iran is responding in their retaliatory action. What is your very first impressions, given that they are drones that we're hearing that were launched from within Iranian territory, and that they're going to take several hours before they make it to Israel?
Well, let's just take a step back for a moment. Anybody that knows anything about the region, about security, is going to acknowledge that this is simply an initial stage of an attack. We don't know what else may be coming. And I imagine, Lana, that is exactly what President Biden is likely discussing with his principals in his cabinet, key national security officials, when they meet momentarily in the Situation Room. Having been in many of those meetings, typically they kick off with an intelligence briefing. In this case, it would likely be the latest and greatest intelligence on operational updates as it pertains to Iran's retaliatory attack. Number two, it would be about Iran's intentions, intelligence about whether Iran intends to escalate further. And then finally, intelligence on whether there are any specific threat streams that could impact U.S. interests in the region, whether that be military facilities, embassy and consulates, or just Americans in general. After that intelligence briefing, I would imagine, in light of the fact that we now know that drones have been launched from Iran itself, the Department of Defense would likely brief the president and the rest of the national security officials in the room on what assets both we and Israel have available from an aerial defense perspective to mitigate these drones and any missiles that may also be striked. Keep in mind that these drones are flying over other countries where the United States has military assets and where the United States does have capabilities to mitigate projectiles overhead. So the president is undoubtedly being briefed on what we can do to help mitigate anything in the airspace on the way from Iran to Israel. And then finally, I would imagine the president is getting operational security updates on enhancements that have been made to protect Americans in the region, to include force protection measures to protect military facilities, whether that's vessels or military bases, and then whether any additional assets are needed to surge to embassies and consulates in the region, primarily Israel, Lebanon, and then I would also put in there Iraq and probably Egypt, whether any additional security assets are needed to protect embassies and consulates in the region if this does escalate further. So that national security meeting that is about to kick off is going to be critical in terms of figuring out what assets may be deployed to keep Israel safe, Lana, but also to keep Americans safe.
And Sam, on that point, what are the risks to American personnel? We know that President Biden has been telegraphing, and as we've been discussing, there is no direct diplomatic ties between the United States and Iran, but we know that he has been telegraphing that if Americans are injured in these retaliatory attacks, that would further bring the United States into the conflict, something as a warning for Iran to try to avoid that. But how has that message been received, and how likely is it that American personnel could potentially be at risk?
Well, there's really three ways that the president can and has been messaging to the Iranians not to mess with the United States. First, he said so publicly. Second, the United States does have private channels through both the Swiss, and was reported on in the press, as well through the Omanis, to pass messages to the Iranians. And there have been reports that both of those channels have been used to send a message to Iran not to involve the United States in whatever it is planning from a retaliatory perspective. And then in addition to that, the United States has also been working the phones to encourage countries who have leverage over Iran, to include China, to tell Iran not to escalate further and to calibrate its response. So it's the public messages, it's the messages through third parties like the Swiss and the Omanis, and then it's asking others with leverage on Iran, like the Chinese, who have a strong trading relationship with Iran, to tell Iran to calibrate its response. We don't know how Iran has reacted to those messages, but what we do know is that regardless of whether Iran intends to strike Americans, these missiles, these projectiles are not always totally accurate, despite many of them being precision guided. So Americans are at risk immediately in the region based upon the aerial activities underway. And further, more strategically, Lana, this could inspire Iranians' proxies to launch attacks against Americans in places like Iraq and Syria, where they've done that in the past, as well as individuals here in the United States, homegrown violent extremists, to be inspired by what they're seeing to act. So it is a high intensity moment. Based on my discussions with officials in the administration and my work in the administration before leaving in December 2023, there are extensive contingency plans in place and an extensive intelligence gathering apparatus that is trying to follow any specific or credible threats to Americans, whether overseas or here in the homeland.
And Sam, very quickly before we let you go, talk to us about the defensive capabilities. As you mentioned, the United States has assets in the geography between Iran and Israel. In addition to Israel's world-famous Iron Dome, how likely is it that any of these drones will be able to actually permeate into Israeli airspace in a way that leads to any casualties?
Well, first on the Israeli side, Israel actually has a multi-layered aerial defense system. It's not just Iron Dome. They also have assets called David Sling and Arrow 1 and 2 that really, Lana, mitigate incoming projectiles at various altitudes and various speeds, whether that be ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, or rockets. So they have a multi-layered aerial defense system, an aerial defense array, as the IDF calls it. The United States has various assets throughout the region, including in the likely flight path of the drones from Iran to Israel that could mitigate those drones as well, whether it's fighter jets or other air defense systems. If Iran does launch a cruise missile from Iran, the United States also has capabilities to mitigate cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. So that is exactly why the Department of Defense has been working so closely with the Israelis, not just today, but dating back decades, to ensure that we have a cohesive, multi-layered air defense system to protect Israel and to protect American assets from any incoming from Iran that could be harmful.
All right, Sam, thank you very much. We'll continue to check in with you throughout the evening as well as tomorrow. Now I want to bring in CBS News Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan. She has been reporting all of this out. I've been quoting from her reporting throughout the day. So, Margaret, what is the latest that you can tell us?
Well, I think you know that the White House is clearly messaging they are bracing for a few hours worth of attacks, that this series of drones that were launched from Iranian territory, as a U.S. official confirmed to me, are not the extent of this reprisal attack that Iran has launched on Israel.
So more are expected to come then? I just want to be clear on that.
Further waves of attack are expected to come over the next few hours. Yes, the drones are not the extent of it. A senior White House official confirmed that the drones that already have been launched were launched from within Iranian territory. As Olivia Gazis was talking earlier, this is then defined as a state-on-state attack. This is not Iran sort of masking its actions by using some of those proxy forces, in other words, local militias scattered throughout the region who receive some level of support. No, this is a state-on-state reprisal. The Iranian foreign minister has been posting about the calls that he has been receiving from diplomats all around the world pressing for a lack of escalation. And we are really, Lana, bracing for the next few hours in order to be able to assess the impact of any potential reprisal strike here. And we know that Israel's response, and they will respond, will be calibrated by the impact of what happens over the next few hours.
And in that way, there are hopes and prayers that there will be limited casualties from any of these strikes. And Margaret, I'm so glad that you referenced the significant change to have this be a state-on-state reprisal. As Olivia was saying, she was even surprised at the initial reporting that these were launched from within Iranian territory. Talk to us about how that potentially changes the calculation in terms of a response from Israel and potentially from the United States, as well as other potential implications of these strikes.
Well, in terms of what would be a benefit essentially to a potential impact is the fact that Israel is very ready for this kind of attack. This is the kind of thing that they have planned and modeled for years. They were caught blindsided by, for example, the October 7th attack and the capabilities of a terrorist force that they vastly underestimated. If anything, Israel is over-prepared in terms of an air defense system that is one of the strongest in the world, as Sam Vinograd was explaining, multi-layered in the ability to defend. But what it does do is it causes this state-on-state tension that you're removing any sense of deniability. But remember, this is Iran feeling it has to respond to what Israel did with that April 1st attack, going in and bombing what Iran says was a diplomatic facility. In Iran's view, it was Israel that made the state-on-state, because a diplomatic facility is defined as sovereign territory of the country it houses. So in Israel's and Iran's view here, they're looking at this through different lenses, right? So that's where it was already defined in the eyes of the Iranians, and now it is just overtly so. As we were talking, though, about the militias and the proxy forces, that threat also exists. And that is a scattered and diffuse threat that is more challenging for the United States or the Israelis to be able to defend against. One of those proxy forces is Hezbollah in the north. In southern Lebanon, in northern Israel, they remain a threatening proxy force to date, since October 7th, they have really not engaged in the way that some had feared. That's something to watch. Watch what happens with the Houthis in particular in the Red Sea area. That's something I'm hearing from U.S. officials that they are very much prepared for. More attacks on vessels, for example, in that Red Sea area. But you also have Iraq, you have Syria, and militias scattered throughout there. That's an area to watch as well. So this is not a story that ends today. It's a matter of really managing the level of escalation.
Margaret, it's such an interesting point that you make because Iran's supreme leader, the United States, Israel, there has been public messages about trying to contain this, even as Iran's supreme leader said that they were going to retaliate, that it was necessary. As you list all of these different disparate groups that are supported by Iran, I'm wondering what kind of power the central government actually has over these groups and the chance for a miscalculation or one leader of one of these groups taking action that has casualty implications that further escalate the war.
That is one of those unknowns that worries U.S. officials the most. You put your finger on it. It is what you can't plan for. And the fact is, according to U.S. officials, Israeli officials that I've spoken with as well, there isn't the same degree of command and control over some of these militias that there once was when the IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani was alive. The United States killed him in a drone attack when he was going into Iraq years ago during the Trump administration. Ever since that time, the military commanders who filled his shoes haven't really been able to choreograph in the same way that he did. So that's not to say Iran doesn't have influence. It's just not as choreographed and controlled in the same way that it once was. And that worries U.S. officials in particular because it makes it harder to exert pressure and get some scale back there. But I should say that ever since that strike that happened that killed the 3 American service people in Jordan, carried out by an Iranian-backed militia, we haven't seen the same high degree, not the same tempo of attacks by militias. And Lana, this is a conversation that will come up again in the coming days. The Prime Minister of Iraq is going to walk into the White House April 15th for a serious conversation with President Biden about, among many things, the Iranian militias that operate or Iranian-backed militias that operate within his territory. And how can he counterbalance that while still allowing for and wanting U.S. troops to remain in Iraq? There are 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq right now. And that is an active negotiation, what happens to them next.
And each of those different factors potentially having implications in this ongoing conflict. Margaret, I know that you have been working all of your sources. You have the best sources. What are you hearing from the White House? What are you hearing from others in terms of what the Biden administration is willing to do?
Well, the United States and President Biden have had this position that they will have the military back, so to speak, of Israel no matter what. But what they don't say publicly is their concern about calibrating the Israeli response. The U.S. and the Biden administration would like to watch these next few hours to be able to assess, are any of these things launched by Iran, whether they are drones or perhaps missiles, later on, do they make it through Israeli air defenses? If they do, what do they hit? Do they cause casualties at all? Or is enough done here that Israel can walk away and say, we can pull back, respond in a way that doesn't further escalate? It's the escalation risk that concerns the Biden administration the most here. And remember, there is a really complicated set of politics within Israel right now.
Absolutely.
There is a prime minister that has a strained relationship with the United States because of some of the decisions that he has made. You have not only the weight that is felt within the intelligence and military services who have been sharply criticized for failures that led to the horrific terror attack on October 7th. When they got it wrong there is a sense they cannot get anything wrong now. and you had the commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East, General Kurilla, in Israel for a reason. He could help coordinate from afar. He could help coordinate from those bases in Doha, Qatar. And instead, he'd flown there to really try to get inside the Israeli military mind here, to get a sense of how strong this reprisal will be by Israel in the coming day or so. That is expected, that Israel will have some kind of response, and to have the U.S. weigh in. Why? Because Israel is dependent on U.S. military backing. And this could escalate and draw the United States in, and the Biden administration is concerned about not getting pulled into this conflict in a direct way.
Well, and there are also political calculations at play with that as well. Margaret, I know you're eager to do more reporting on this, but I thought I would just read for our viewers a statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and get your thoughts on it. He said, "I established a clear principle. Whoever hurts us, we hurt him. We will protect ourselves from any threat, and we will do so with coolness and determination." When you read that, Margaret, what did you think? What were you reading between the lines?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is the ultimate survivor in Israeli politics. He is the longest-serving prime minister in that country's history, and he has built a career on the promise of being able to protect the security of Israel. He has built his career on that, and he failed to prevent the most horrific slaughter of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. He is being sharply criticized from his own people for that failure, which is why now, in this state-to-state escalation that we are seeing, there is the expectation, and it sounds like that's what he's saying in that statement, that Israel will respond. No matter what, before a single drone or missile hits it, they will respond. That is how I would understand that statement, because fundamentally, as so many former military officials tell me in particular, Israel has to reestablish deterrence. They have to be able to show they are not weak in this moment of what they feel is vulnerability. The Biden administration is helping them right now because the United States has sent, as our Ellie Watson has reported, not just kept U.S. vessels and destroyers in the region. We both confirmed that the U.S. sent fighter jets. The U.S. is capable of shooting down some of these drones if President Biden ordered it as they cross through airspace. The United States could shoot these down in Syria. They could shoot them down in Iraq. There are a lot of things the United States can do to prevent anything from hitting Israel in a significant way and really try to minimize that so that the expected Israeli response is not further escalatory.
All right. Margaret Brennan, appreciate all of your insight and valuable reporting. Thank you. I'm going to bring in now, Robert Berger. He is in Jerusalem, a CBS News contributor for us. Robert, talk to us about what you're hearing there. You're on the ground, and what you make of what we have learned so far, not only about this first round of attacks, but as our Margaret Brennan was reporting, the idea that there will be additional waves.
There are, as far as we know already, according to what we're hearing on Israeli media, another wave and maybe a third wave. And about 100 drones are headed in this direction. Now, it's not going to be immediate, according to the Army spokesman. These drones, they're slow, and they may take up to 8 hours to get here. But still, they're preparing for the possibility that some of these will get through the defenses. The defenses include a missile defense on the ground, the various anti-missile systems. There are also warplanes in the air. And, you know, Netanyahu did say that this is both defensive and offensive. And there are reports that Israel is carrying out strikes in Syria and also in Lebanon. And of course, the big question is whether Israel will retaliate inside Iran itself.
And Robert, talk to us about the assets that the U.S. has on the ground there.
The United States has,
and by there, sorry, let me just clarify. By there, I mean in the region.
Right. In the region, we have warships. We have a U.S., the Eisenhower Carrier Group, which is in the Red Sea. That includes both offensive and defensive capabilities, anti-missile, anti-drone capabilities. There are a couple of destroyers here in the eastern Mediterranean near Israel. And also, there are Patriot missile, anti-missile batteries, and other anti-missile systems deployed across the region, I believe in Jordan and other places that could also help intercept these incoming drones.
And Robert, we were speaking earlier with Imtiaz. He was in Tel Aviv about the reaction there. Obviously, it is pretty late at night where you are there in Jerusalem. But what are you hearing in terms of how people are responding now and how people were preparing for these likely reprisals?
Well, people are going home. A couple of hours ago, they were interviewing people in Tel Aviv and everybody was happy and drinking and having a good time. But now, once the army came out with the restrictions, such as schools will be closed and that kind of thing, now everybody's concerned. The airport here, the international airport, is due to close down and within the hour. So obviously, this is a very dangerous situation. People are going home, and I think people are calm but concerned. And also, it's expected that these will hit military targets and not civilian targets, these drones. So I think it's calm, but everyone is obviously very concerned.
Thank you, Robert. I also want to just note for our viewers that in Israel, it is a regular school day on Sunday. That's something that's different from here in the United States, so might not have computed necessarily. Robert, I just want to ask you, though, about the politics that are something that Margaret and I were discussing. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister there, vowing to take appropriate response. Any sense of what that might entail?
Yeah, Israel will have to, I believe, retaliate inside Iranian territory. You can't have an attack like this from Iran and not have Israel respond. The question is, what is Israel going to do? How far will it carry its response? One possibility, which is what the Israelis have been threatening to do for a long time, is to try and take out Iran's nuclear facilities. And then you would have really a major war on your hands, or they could try and perhaps limit it and close this war down in a few days. But no, this is a game changer. We've never seen Iran fire directly from its own territory. It's always used its proxies like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. So I expect we're going to see severe Israeli retaliation inside Iran.
Very interesting. We appreciate all of the insight that you're providing. As we understand it, officials in Jordan have also declared a state of emergency as Iran's attack on Israel is now making its way across the Middle East. Local media reports that the nation closed its airspace to incoming, outgoing, and transit flights. We're going to bring back in CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tayeb. He's there in Tel Aviv. Imtiaz, I want to talk to you now about the timing. Shabbat just ended there in Israel. Passover begins on Monday. For Muslims, the Ramadan just ended on Friday. It seems like there was this one opportunity that Iran potentially had to undertake these attacks without falling on a holy day for either Jews or Muslims. Is that something that potentially was at play?
Look, things are tense here at the best of times, right?
Right.
As well as sort of being, this complicated region with all of these actors and players. We have this war going on in Gaza. There's obviously all of these other considerations. This is the Holy Land, for lack of a better phrase. But I think when it comes to Iran, when it comes to this decision that was made to launch these drones and potentially even more than that, in fact, we've been monitoring Iranian state media, and the language they're using is quite interesting. They didn't just say or confirm that drones were launched, they also used the word missiles as well. Now, what that means, we don't know. We don't have any reports that missiles have been launched from Iran. But if that is part of the longer strategy, as this night progresses, it could be potentially very concerning. But to answer your broader question, look, it's very clear that after that embassy attack in Damascus, and this is U.S. Government confirming that when Israel targeted the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and you see those images, that building was completely destroyed. A number of people were killed, including a very senior Iranian military commander, that Iran felt it needed to respond in a considerable way. And of course, they said so. They said, we will respond. This was a violation. And now we have these drones that are on their way. And I just want to read to you very quickly a statement we've just received from the Israeli military, spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. He said, and again, I'm quoting here, Iran has launched a direct attack from Iranian soil towards the state of Israel. We're closely monitoring, and again, I'm quoting here, Iranian killer drones that are en route to Israel sent by Iran. This is a severe and dangerous escalation. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are at the highest level of readiness, again, ahead of this large-scale attack from Iran. That coming from Israel's main military spokesperson, describing it as a large-scale attack. But again, as we've been saying, Lana, these drones, as far as we know, will take quite a while to get here, at least 9 hours to travel all the way from Iran to Israel. And as we've been hearing from Margaret and from others, it's very likely that the U.S. could intercept those. We've also been hearing that the Jordanians have suggested that they may intercept those drones. And that's because beyond Israel, there are actors in this region, including the U.S., of course, Jordan, which neighbors Israel, who do not want to see a wider escalation spread across this region. It is deeply concerning to them. But the reality is for the first time, Iran has overtly carried out a strike towards Israel. That in itself is extremely significant. And as we've been hearing, Israel will feel compelled to respond, whether or not these drones even make it here. Lana.
As we're talking about the necessity of response for foreign governments, I'm reminded of the January drone strike that killed American personnel. Those were also Iranian drones. Remind us, just in terms of context, Imtiaz, about some of the major things that happened between October 7th and today that led us to this point.
Yeah, look, we have this awful war unfolding in Gaza. We have over 30,000 people killed, the majority of them women and children, and it is horrendous. We've had the October 7th attacks in which 1,200 Israelis were killed. We've had so much pain in that very specific sphere, but if you widen the aperture, we've seen regionally the region really become shaped by this. To the north, you have Israel's border with Lebanon, in which almost daily they've been trading fire with Hezbollah, which of course is very much aligned with Iran, backed by Iran. We've also had the Houthis in Yemen, who have been targeting shipping vessels in the Red Sea. In fact, just today, doing a ship we understand is owned by an Israeli billionaire. We've had other strikes on U.S. forces, as you rightly point out, across the region, proxies that are backed or supported by Iran. All of this has been happening at the same time. And although it's been extremely concerning for anyone, and more importantly, has been articulated very clearly, specifically from President Biden, who has said he does not want to see this conflict in Gaza spread across the region, we now have these drones being launched from Iran towards Israel. And the fear is that amidst all of these other things that have happened, that this could be that match that really inflames the region. But as we've been hearing, again, from the president himself, again, we've heard, from the Iranian leadership saying that they don't want to see an escalation, but that they had to respond to Israel's attack on their embassy inside of Damascus, causing those casualties, destroying that building. Again, that's just by way of explanation, what Iran says. And so all of this happening all at once has really had this region on edge, for lack of a better phrase. And again, the concern is this the tipping point? Are we going to see this conflict spread and other countries become involved? And that, of course, would be disastrous on so many levels for so many people. And it's obviously understandable why President Biden doesn't want to see something like that happen. But we have to consider that Israel and the Israeli leadership are also watching this, saying we have to now respond to this too, that we are now being directly targeted by another state. And whatever happens, however, if these drones even reach Israel, it still was launched towards and directed at Israel, and that they will have to do something. And so it is extremely worrying. It's very alarming. And the next few hours will tell us a lot about what could potentially happen next. Lana.
Imtiaz, you referenced something that, honestly, in all the discussions that we've had so far in this time period since learning about the launch of those drones, we haven't even discussed. I'm hoping you can tell our viewers more about the paramilitary Revolutionary Guard seizing that container ship in the Straits of Hormuz, and about how that is also something that just happened today, Saturday, and how that fits into this larger picture.
Yeah, I mean, it just speaks to the fact that what happened on October 7th and everything that's happened since isn't getting quieter. It isn't calming down. It is doing the opposite. It is becoming more fraught, more intense, more alarming, and more concerning. What we're seeing is escalation. And the Biden administration from the very beginning has been trying to contain this. You remember back in October, we heard that the Biden administration, or we learned later, had to work extremely hard to really deter the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not only go into Gaza, but to potentially launch an assault against Hezbollah in the north. And as we've been saying, there's been relatively low-level conflict. Some would argue slightly more than low-level, but it's not been to the extent that, of course, we've seen in Gaza, but that the president really was able to convince Prime Minister Netanyahu to not also go into Lebanon as well, again, because of this concern of this becoming a regional war, a regional conflict. But the war in Gaza is now over 6 months. We've seen the devastation there. We've seen the high civilian casualty. And so across the region, you have Arab countries looking with their population saying, what are you doing about Gaza? What are you doing about Israel? Again, by way of explanation. And so Iran, which, again, has been involved in so many of these proxy battles with Israel, with the U.S. and elsewhere, the fact that it was so directly targeted by Israel in Damascus, again, as we've been saying, it felt so compelled that it needed to do something. But as we've been saying, the real fear here is that as all of these things happen at once, could this lead to something more serious? And the short answer is we just don't know, because whatever happens in the next couple of hours, it's really then up to Israel to decide what Israel wants to do. And that is why the U.S. is working so closely with the Israelis. Of course, this, rock steady relationship. But more importantly, again, everything that we've seen from the president, everything we've heard, is that what they want to prevent is a wider regional conflict from spreading. And I'm more than certain that when President Biden speaks with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we don't know if they have spoken to each other directly yet, that he will be appealing for calm, to de-escalate the situation and to not let this spread into a regional war.
All right. Imtiaz, thank you. I want to bring in now CBS News contributor and former chief of operations in the CIA's Counterterrorism Mission Center, Andrew Boyd. Andrew, these drones are on their way to Israel. So what do you anticipate this escalation will mean?
So good evening. And we, again, as our colleagues have been saying, we're trying to avoid escalation. But because there's a lot of unknowns and uncertainty as to where these potentially 100 plus drones are heading, we can assume that there will be escalation. Again, this could be the lead element of a wider attack. We're focusing on these 100 drones, but in fact, this could be a lead element of a broader attack, including rockets and missiles into northern Israel from Lebanon, from other proxies, Shia proxies inside Iraq. One thing is for certain that the Israelis are prepared for this. U.S. Central Command, and has been noted, General Kurilla, the commander of Central Command, is in the area. So the Israelis are prepared for this. The U.S. forces in the region are prepared for this. But there's a lot of unknowns. As far as escalation goes, we'll have to see over the next 12 to 24 hours what this all means. But there is a significant potential for an escalation into a broader regional conflict, which again, President Biden and his entire administration want to avoid.
And on that front, we heard from our colleagues that the Jordanians may potentially try to shoot down some of these incoming drones. Egypt has traditionally played a role in trying to de-escalate conflict in the region. How do you expect some other countries to respond to this?
So shooting out the drones, I mean, many of these drones are slow moving, they're subsonic. So the Jordanians could shoot them down. Again, we've seen in the context of Ukraine, the Ukrainians are successful in shooting down a number of these Iranian manufactured or Iranian modeled drones used by the Russians. That being said, it's a mass attack, 100, and again, we keep hearing the term 100, but there could be more. And they could very easily overwhelm the air defenses of Israel and Israel's neighbors, such as Jordan. I mean, the Jordanians have a very strong military, but their counter missile capabilities are limited. And the Jordanians don't want to use all of their drone counter missile capabilities on just this one attack, or else they'll be out of anti-aircraft capability.
And Andrew, I want to pick up on something that you said, that these are slow-moving subsonic drones. We also heard from Imtiaz that Iranian state media is reporting that in addition to the drones, that there are also missiles that were sent. But in the case of the drones, at least, given that they are slow-moving, given that it will take hours, and that they are potentially more easily taken out before causing any casualties, do you see that as an indication that Iran needed to take retaliatory action, but is in fact trying to de-escalate this conflict to the best of their ability?
So that is in pattern with how the Iranians, after Qasem Soleimani was killed, they did signal quite a bit to the United States that an attack was coming. Now, granted, it was not a drone attack against U.S. bases in Iraq. It was a ballistic missile attack, which it is supersonic and obviously travels at quite a faster rate. If the Iranian attack against Israel is limited to 100 slow-moving subsonic drones with fairly limited explosive capability, and it ends at that, perhaps that is the Iranian signal. Yes, let's not escalate beyond this, and that's all we're intending to do. The problem with that is, if those 100 drones land in Tel Aviv in a populated area and kill civilians, hit a hospital, hit a concentration of Israeli civilians, I don't think the Netanyahu government will have any alternative other than to further retaliate against the Iranians.
And the prime minister has said as much. Let's talk a little bit, though, about timing, Andrew. I was speaking with Imtiaz about religious calendars, but this also comes in the context of Israel intending to have a ground invasion in Rafah, being dissuaded by the United States and other international actors trying to minimize casualties in Gaza. Do you think that in any way that this is Iran trying to redivert attention away from that potential military action by Israel?
No, I really don't. I mean, I think this is solely tied to the attack in Damascus against the facility adjacent to the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and the fact that a very senior IRGC Quds Force officer was killed, along with several other officers. This is directly tied to that, and a need in the minds of the Iranian government that they needed to retaliate against that alleged Israeli attack. The Iranians have really tried to stay out of the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and any linkage between the two, I think, would be a supposition that just wouldn't fit with Iranian behavior.
Interesting. And you didn't say alleged attack by Israel on that embassy in Damascus. Israel has not claimed responsibility for it. Obviously, Iran wholly is holding Israel responsible. Does it matter in any way that Israel has not claimed responsibility, or? I guess help our viewers understand that aspect of it.
So yes, you make a very good point. But in the history of Israel's conflict with Syria, and then with Iranians and the Iranian proxies in Syria, there has always been a denial, or the Israelis just have never acknowledged it. So my point on the alleged attack, yes, is that the Israelis have never acknowledged that they did attack that facility. Now there's no one else who could claim responsibility, but the bigger debate about that facility is what it was, and the Iranians are claiming it was a consulate. I lived in Damascus as a diplomat. Actually, I lived in that neighborhood, and the Iranians have used that facility and the embassy for their activities, supporting Hezbollah, supporting other Shia militia groups around the region. So to reference it as a consulate that issues visas as a consulate, the United States consulates worldwide would, is a bit of a stretch. So that argument is a bit spurious on the Iranians' part. But the fact of the matter remains that the Israelis have not acknowledged that was their attack against that facility that, I say in quotes, the Iranians claims a consulate.
Andrew, appreciate that insight. I want to ask you about one other thing, because critics of the Biden administration would point to their decision to release those funds in terms of a humanitarian release of the funds back to Iran. In fact, we heard that from the former president, Donald Trump, in his criticism of the Biden administration just yesterday evening. Is that, in fact, a factor in this in any way?
I really don't think so. I mean, diplomatic negotiations are what they are. Foreign states, adversary states like the Iranians put terms on those negotiations. The Biden administration saw that was an important negotiating tactic to offer those funds. The Iranians have plenty of other funds to fund their nefarious activities throughout the region. The funding of Hezbollah and other groups like that. One specific check, so to speak, is not going to make a demonstrable difference to Iranian intent in the region.
And if you'll bear with us for just a second, it looks like we have a statement from the Iranian embassy in London. It's a formal statement. It says, in retaliation for the heinous actions committed by the Zionist regime, which included an assault on the consular section of the Iranian embassy in Damascus and the loss of Iran's military leaders and advisors, the Aerospace Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched a punitive strike against the occupied territories. This operation involved the use of both missiles and drones, aiming to hold the illegitimate and criminal regime accountable. The language that they use is in some ways to be expected from Iran. But what do you make of that statement, Andrew?
So back to our earlier discussion. I mean, I think they're trying to get ahead of this with a public relations message, so to speak, that implies that this is a bounded attack, that they are they're not trying to de-escalate, obviously, but they're trying to keep this not go beyond where they currently are in this conflict. If in fact they're successful in bounding their retaliation, I think that'll be a good thing for the entire region and for the United States of America as well, and definitely a good thing for Israel. But they're really playing with fire, in my mind, the Iranian government, because where those drones land and where they detonate and and if in fact there are ballistic missiles, because honestly, the lag time between a ballistic missile launch and impact, I mean, I think we'd already be there if in fact they had launched ballistic missiles. Mm-hmm. So I'm skeptical even on that. But let's just, for argument's sake, say there are ballistic missiles inbound to Israel and 100 drones. The question is where they're going to impact. And if they kill Israeli civilians, And if they land in downtown Tel Aviv, if they hit important locations in Jerusalem, I really think the Iranians may have overplayed their hand.
All right,
But
Andrew Boyd.
Only time will tell on that.
And we will be watching over the next few hours in particular. Andrew Boyd, the former chief of operations in the CIA's Counterterrorism Mission Center. Appreciate all of your insight. For now, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the very latest.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
Just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where. But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. See you on Prime Time, streaming free everywhere.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Welcome back. I'm Lana Zak. We are following breaking news from Israel after Iran launched attacks in retaliation to a deadly attack on its consulate in Syria. While the action was not unexpected, it is notable that Iran has launched weapons from inside their territory headed towards Israel. Now, those weapons will take hours before they actually make it to Israeli airspace. And moments ago, we heard from IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. Here's some of what he had to say.
Iran has launched a direct attack from Iranian soil towards the state of Israel. We are closely monitoring Iranian killer drones that are en route to Israel sent by Iran. This is a severe and dangerous escalation. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are at the highest level of readiness ahead of this large-scale attack from Iran. Together with our partners, the Israel Defense Forces, is operating at full force to defend the state of Israel and the people of Israel. This is a mission that we are determined and ready to fulfill.
And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has released a statement saying, quote, in retaliation for the heinous actions committed by the Zionist regime, which included an assault on the consular section of the Iranian embassy in Damascus and the loss of Iran's military leaders and advisors, the aerospace force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched a punitive strike against the occupied territories. Our Margaret Brennan reports that additional waves are expected. And for more in-depth coverage on Iran's retaliatory attacks against Israel, we want to go now to our partners at BBC News who are covering the latest.
But also, of course, in terms of the security of America's most important ally in the Middle East.
Well, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Tel Aviv looking calm on your screen at the moment, but all of Israel, that's northern Israel, you can see there, all of Israel currently on a state of alert as Iran does indeed launch its promised attack on Israel. Operation True Promise is how it has been described by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Daniel Levy is a former Israeli negotiator and president of the US Middle East Project. Daniel, welcome to the program. What's your assessment?
Thank you.
What's your assessment of where we are right now?
That there is an awful lot of speculation. There is also an awful lot of, I imagine, disinformation, and part of this is psychological warfare as well, as to what is exactly going on. That will become clearer in the coming hours. I think what we can say right now is let's stick to what we know, which is that for these 6 months, it has been quite clear that the signals sent by Iran were that its intention was not to be brought directly into this, that has been an outcome the US was seeking to achieve. Clearly, the US has given Israel tremendous rope to operate with impunity in Gaza, and we've seen the devastation there and the killing and suffering on a mass scale. But America was being, I think, quite clear with Israel not to turn this into a regional conflagration. There were indirect channels between the US and Iran, and perhaps meetings in Oman between those countries.